The hearing room of the Joint Economic Committee was vibrating with a specific kind of Washington energy, the kind that precedes a collision. The subject on the docket was the economic impact of green transition policies on the American working class. On one side of the dais sat Senator John Kennedy of Louisiana. He looked like he had just rolled out of a hammock on a humid Sunday afternoon. His suit was rumpled, his tie was slightly askew, and his reading glasses were perched precariously on the end of his nose. To the uninitiated, he looked like a distracted country lawyer who had wandered into the Capitol by mistake. Next to him sat his trademark prop, a battered, overstuffed accordion file folder, bulging with papers and flagged with neon sticky notes. On the witness side sat Representative Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, AOC. She was the picture of modern political celebrity. Immaculate makeup, bold red lipstick, designer blazer. She sat with her chin up, flanked by aides who were furiously typing on iPads. She looked bored. She looked ready to lecture. The chairman banged the gavel. "Senator Kennedy, you are recognized." Kennedy cleared his throat, a sound like gravel grinding in a mixer. He shuffled his papers, seemingly confused. "Thank you, Mr. Chairman," Kennedy drawled, his voice thick with a Southern accent that disarmed enemies by lowering their guard. "And welcome, Congresswoman. Now, I've been reading your proposal here, the Green New Deal, and I got to admit, I'm a little confused by the math." He peered over his glasses. "You say this plan will cost, by conservative estimates, $93 trillion. Now, the entire GDP of the United States is about $25 trillion. So, I'm just a simple guy, but I'm trying to figure out how we pay for a $93 trillion dinner with a $25 trillion wallet." AOC sighed. It was a loud, theatrical sigh meant for the cameras. She leaned into the microphone, her expression shifting to one of pity. "Senator," she began, her voice crisp and rapid-fire, "with all due respect, I think you are relying on outdated economic frameworks. We are discussing modern monetary theory. The government is not a household. We don't have a wallet. We issue currency. The constraints are not fiscal. They are resource-based." She paused, smiling slightly. "Perhaps, Senator, if you took a modern economics class, you would understand that debt is a tool for equity, not a shackle. We need to move past this simplistic, archaic thinking if we want to save the planet. Some of us actually understand the nuance of 21st century finance." The room went silent. The aides behind AOC smirked. She had done it. She had dunked on the old, confused Republican. Kennedy stopped shuffling his papers. He froze. Slowly, very slowly, he took off his glasses. He folded them and placed them on the table. He looked at her, and the confusion vanished from his eyes, replaced by a glint of cold, hard steel. "Well now, Congresswoman," Kennedy said, his voice dropping an octave, losing the wobble. "That is mighty generous of you, offering me educational advice. I appreciate that." He leaned forward. "I did take a few economics classes, as it happens. I graduated magna cum laude from Vanderbilt University. Then I went to the University of Virginia Law School, where I was executive editor of the Law Review." He paused, letting the resume land. "And then I went to Oxford University in England on a Rhodes Scholarship, where I earned a first-class honors degree in civil law. I studied economics under some of the finest minds in Western civilization." Kennedy smiled. It wasn't a nice smile. It was the smile of a trap snapping shut. "So, I reckon I've got the education part covered. What I'm trying to figure out is where you learned that printing $93 trillion won't cause hyperinflation that destroys the very working-class people you claim to represent. AOC's smile faltered. She blinked, once, twice. She hadn't expected the resume dump. But you know what? Kennedy continued, patting the massive accordion file next to him. Thump. You are right about one thing. I am old-fashioned. I'm old-fashioned enough to believe in receipts. I believe that if you are going to lecture the American people about sacrifice, about giving up their cars, their stoves, and their paychecks, then you ought to be living by those same rules. Kennedy opened the first tab of the file. You called me archaic, Congresswoman. You said I don't understand nuance. Well, let's look at the nuance of your life. Let's see if the Green New Deal applies to Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, or if it's just for the rest of us suckers. Let's begin, class. Analytical expansion. The hubris versus competence dynamic. This opening section establishes the core conflict of the narrative. The ivory tower versus the real world. The trap. Kennedy intentionally presents himself as a simple country lawyer. This is a strategic camouflage. By appearing disorganized and asking simple questions, he invites AOC to underestimate him. Her arrogance, take an economics class, is the trigger he was waiting for. The status reversal. The moment Kennedy lists his credentials, Vanderbilt, UVA, Oxford, Rhodes Scholar, the power dynamic flips instantly. He exposes her condescension as ignorance. It validates the audience's suspicion that elites think they are smarter than everyone else, but often lack basic wisdom. The prop. The accordion file is crucial. It represents evidence. While AOC speaks in theories, modern monetary theory, Kennedy speaks in documentation. It signals to the audience that what follows will be a forensic dismantling, not just a debate. Congresswoman, Kennedy said, pulling a sheet of paper from the file. Let's talk about sacrifice. That is the core of your message, isn't it? Americans need to sacrifice to save the climate. We need to drive less, eat less meat, turn down the AC, pay more taxes. So, I got curious, Kennedy drawled. I wanted to see how much sacrificing you were doing. He held up a photo of a sleek white car. The Tesla Model 3. You drive a Tesla. Beautiful car. Costs about $50,000. Now, I recall you claiming you couldn't afford an apartment in D.C. when you got elected, but you managed to buy a luxury electric vehicle. But here is the irony, Congresswoman. You attack Elon Musk every day on Twitter. You attack billionaires. You claim to support unions. Kennedy looked over his glasses. Tesla is a non-union shop. You, the champion of the working man, crossed a theoretical picket line to buy a luxury status symbol from the very billionaire you claim to hate. Why didn't you buy a Chevy Bolt? That's union-made. That's affordable. AOC shifted in her seat. The vehicle choice is irrelevant to the systemic issue of... It is relevant to your credibility, Kennedy interrupted gently. But let's talk about where you park that Tesla. He pulled out a rental listing. Navy Yard, Washington, D.C. You live in a luxury apartment building. Concierge. Rooftop pool. Whole Foods downstairs. Rent is upwards of $4,000 a month. Congresswoman, the median rent in your district, the Bronx, is about $1,700. You are living in one of the most gentrified, expensive, exclusive bubbles in the nation. Kennedy leaned back. You see, down in Louisiana, we call this champagne socialism. You want the coal miner in West Virginia to lose his job. You want the trucker to pay $6 for gas. You want the single mom to pay more for heating oil. But you You get the Tesla. You get the rooftop pool. You get the Whole Foods. And when the prices go up because of your policies, you can afford it. They can't. Kennedy flipped a page. I checked your carbon footprint, Congresswoman. Between the flights, the SUV convoys for security, and the luxury living, your carbon footprint is double that of the average American you are lecturing. So, I have to ask, is the climate crisis an existential threat? Or is it just a hobby for rich people who can afford to buy their way out of the consequences? Analytical expansion, the disconnect of the elite. This section attacks the do as I say, not as I do hypocrisy. The Tesla paradox. Kennedy uses the Tesla to trap her on two fronts, class and labor. It's a luxury item, class, made by non-union labor, labor. This exposes the fracture between cultural leftism, buying cool green tech, and labor leftism, supporting unions. The gentrification argument. By highlighting her luxury apartment in D.C., Kennedy alienates her from her base in the Bronx. He paints her not as a representative of the poor, but as a tourist in the world of the wealthy. The cost of policy. Kennedy effectively frames the Green New Deal not as a way to save the planet, but as a tax on the poor. He argues that progressive policies are luxury beliefs, ideas that confer status on the rich, but impose costs on the poor. Kennedy watched her squirm. He didn't give her time to recover. But speaking of rich people, Kennedy said, pulling out a glossy photograph, let's talk about the night you decided to party with them. He held up the infamous image, AOC at the Met Gala. She was wearing the white designer gown. The words, "Tax the Rich," were scrawled in blood-red letters across the back. She was smiling, holding a glass of champagne, surrounded by photographers. September 13th, 2021. You attended the Met Gala, one of the most exclusive, elitist events on planet Earth. Kennedy looked at the paper. Ticket price, $35,000. Table price, up to $300,000. Congresswoman, that ticket costs more than many of your constituents make in a year. A full year of scrubbing floors, driving trucks, and serving tables. And you were there, sipping champagne, rubbing elbows with hedge fund managers, Hollywood celebrities, and the very billionaires you claim are destroying the world. It was a statement, AOC snapped, finding her voice. It was about bringing the message into the belly of the beast. I didn't pay for the ticket. I was invited as a guest of the museum. A guest, Kennedy repeated slowly. So, you accepted a $35,000 gift to attend a party for the 0.1%. And you wore a dress. Let's talk about the dress. Custom-made, designer, costs thousands. And the message, tax the rich. Kennedy chuckled darkly. Congresswoman, looking at this photo, you are the rich. You are the aristocracy. You are the court jester performing for the king. They loved your dress. They laughed. They applauded. Because they know you aren't a threat to them. You are entertainment. Kennedy leaned forward, his face hardening. Do you know what tax the rich looks like to a small business owner in my state? It looks like the IRS auditing them for $600. It looks like inflation eating their savings. But to you, it's a fashion statement. It's a costume. You mocked the working class that night, Congresswoman. You wore their struggle as a prop while you drank champagne with their oppressors. And the worst part? You looked like you were having the time of your life. Analytical expansion, performative activism. This section deconstructs performative politics. The symbol versus the reality. Kennedy highlights the absurdity of the tax the rich dress. The message, anti-wealth, contradicts the medium, a $35,000 gala. This proves that for AOC, the aesthetic of revolution is more important than the reality of inequality. The court jester. Metaphor, this is a devastating critique. Kennedy argues that AOC isn't fighting the system. She has been absorbed by it. The elites invite her because she makes them feel edgy and progressive without actually threatening their power. She is their entertainment. The gift economy. By focusing on the free ticket, Kennedy frames her as a beneficiary of elite privilege. She didn't buy her way in. She sold her integrity for entry. Kennedy let the silence following the Met Gala revelation stretch out. He slowly closed that section of the accordion file and opened a new one, this one marked with a bright green tab. Commerce. "You know, Congresswoman," Kennedy began, his voice taking on a deceptively chatty tone. "You talk a lot about the evils of capitalism. You say it's exploitative. You say profit is theft. But looking at your financial disclosures, you're actually a pretty good capitalist yourself." He reached into the file and pulled out a sweatshirt. It was navy blue, with the words, "Tax the Rich," printed across the chest. "I bought this from your campaign website," Kennedy said, holding it up for the cameras. "Cost me $58 plus shipping. Now, I did a little digging into the supply chain. I know you claim everything is union-made in the USA, and I'm sure the tag says that. But let's look at the margins." Kennedy pulled out a spreadsheet. Retail price, $58. Production cost. Based on the volume you're moving, industry experts estimate this costs about $6 to $9 to make and print. That is a 500% to 800% markup. Kennedy whistled low. "Congresswoman, that is a profit margin that would make a pharmaceutical executive blush. That is better than Apple. That is better than Exxon. You are selling a slogan about destroying capitalism, using the most ruthless capitalist pricing strategy I've ever seen." AOC leaned into the mic, her face tight. "The proceeds go to grassroots organizing. It funds the movement. We don't take corporate PAC money." "You are the corporation," Kennedy shot back, his voice losing its softness. "You have sold millions of dollars worth of this merchandise. You have turned revolution into a consumer product. You have commodified dissent." "And who is buying this?" Kennedy asked, looking at the audience. "It ain't the plumber in Shreveport. It ain't the waitress in Baton Rouge. It's college kids with their parents' credit cards. It's the guilty elite in Brooklyn. You are selling them a fashion accessory that makes them feel virtuous." "But here is the kicker," Kennedy said, flipping a page. "You say you fight for the working class, but when you charge $58 for a sweatshirt that costs $6 to make, you aren't helping the poor. You are exploiting your followers. You are extracting wealth from people who believe in you and funneling it into your political machine." Kennedy tossed the sweatshirt onto the table. It landed in a heap next to his glasses. "I have to hand it to you, Congresswoman. It is a brilliant business model. Convince people the system is broken. Convince them they are victims. And then sell them a T-shirt to make them feel better about it. P.T. Barnum would be proud. But don't call it socialism. Call it what it is: the merchandise industrial complex. Analytical expansion, the commodification of dissent." This section analyzes revolution as a brand. The markup argument, Kennedy uses the raw math, $58 versus $6, to strip away the ideological veneer of her merchandise. By exposing the profit margin, he frames her not as an activist, but as a merchant. The target audience. Kennedy correctly identifies that her customer base is not the working poor who cannot afford a $58 shirt, but the aspirational elite. This reinforces the champagne socialist theme. The cynicism of the grift. The comparison to P.T. Barnum suggests that AOC is a showman exploiting her audience's emotions for profit. It attacks her sincerity, which is the foundation of her political appeal. "Now," Kennedy said, returning to the file, "since we are talking about where all that merchandise money goes, let's talk about personnel. Or, more specifically, let's talk about your boyfriend, or fiancé, partner, whatever the term is today, Mr. Riley Roberts." AOC froze. Bringing up family was usually an unspoken red line in the Senate, but Kennedy had crossed it miles ago. "Congresswoman, I'm looking at your FEC filings from the early days of your campaign, and I see a lot of payments to Mr. Roberts." Kennedy held up a document with highlighted rows: consulting fees, marketing services, strategic advice. Thousands of dollars funneling from your campaign donors directly into your household. Now, Mr. Roberts is a web developer, I believe, or a marketing guy. He provided essential services to the campaign at fair market value, AOC interjected, her voice rising in pitch. "This has been litigated. It is legal." "Legal loopholes are my favorite kind," Kennedy chuckled darkly. "See, in the real world, if I take money from a donor and give it to my spouse, that's called embezzlement. But in Washington, if I call him a consultant, it's called strategy." "But let's look at the Justice Democrats PAC," Kennedy continued. "The organization that recruited you. The organization that your chief of staff, Saikat Chakrabarti, ran. There were millions of dollars moved around there. Shell companies, LLCs, money moving from the PAC to private companies controlled by your staff. And Mr. Roberts was right in the middle of it." Kennedy leaned forward. "Here is what it looks like to a simple guy like me. You raised money from bartenders and waitresses, people who gave you their last $10 because they believed you were different. And you used that money to put your boyfriend on the payroll. You used that money to subsidize your household income. You criticized the Trumps. You criticized the corporate nepotism. But you built a mom-and-pop shop of political grift. Mr. Roberts got a paycheck. You got a career. And the donors? They got a $58 sweatshirt and a promise that the world would end in 12 years. Is that the new politics you promised? Because it looks a hell of a lot like the old corruption. Analytical expansion, soft corruption, and nepotism. This section attacks ethical hypocrisy. The household income frame. Kennedy simplifies the complex campaign finance laws into a simple concept. She used donor money to pay her partner. Since they live together, this effectively subsidizes their joint lifestyle. It frames campaign donations as personal income. The small donor. Guilt? By reminding the audience that her money comes from bartenders and waitresses, Kennedy creates a moral victim. Stealing from a corporation is one thing, skimming from the poor is another. The Trump comparison. Kennedy preempts the "what about Trump" defense by acknowledging it. You criticize the Trumps. He argues that she is guilty of the very nepotism she condemns in others. Kennedy slammed the personnel tab shut. The sound echoed in the quiet room. "But stealing a little money for your boyfriend. That's small potatoes," Kennedy said. "Let's talk about the real damage. Let's talk about the money you set on fire." He opened the blue folder. This was the heavy artillery. November 2018. Amazon announces headquarters 2 in Long Island City, Queens, right next to your district. Kennedy pulled out a chart. 25,000 jobs. Minimum. Average salary. $150,000. $27 billion in tax revenue for New York over 20 years. And you killed it. Kennedy looked at her with genuine bewilderment. You led the protests. You called it a giveaway to Jeff Bezos. You said, and I quote, "We are giving Amazon $3 billion that we could spend on schools and subways." Kennedy took off his glasses. Congresswoman, I want to give you a chance to explain this math. Because where I come from, if I give you a coupon for $3 off a $27 pizza, I didn't give you $3 in cash. I gave you a discount to buy the pizza. If you don't buy the pizza, I don't save $3. I lose the sale. You didn't have $3 billion in a vault, Congresswoman. That $3 billion was a tax break on future revenue that Amazon would have generated. When you chased Amazon away, did you get a check for $3 billion to spend on schools? AOC stared at him. We preserved our community from gentrification. We stopped corporate welfare. You got zero, Kennedy shouted, slamming his hand on the table. You got $0 for schools, $0 for subways, and you lost $27 billion in revenue. But worse than the money, Kennedy said, his voice dropping, you lost the jobs. He pulled out a photo of a boarded-up storefront. This is Joe's Bodega in Long Island City. Joe borrowed money to expand his inventory because he thought 25,000 workers were coming. He thought the boom was here. When you killed the deal, Amazon went to Virginia. They are doing fine. Virginia is booming. But Joe went bankrupt. He lost his business. He lost his home. There are 25,000 families in New York today who could have had a six-figure job, who could have had health care, who could have had a future, but they don't. Because you wanted to score a political point against a billionaire. You sacrificed your constituents' livelihoods on the altar of your ideology. That isn't a victory, Congresswoman. That is an economic homicide, analytical expansion, opportunity cost, and economic illiteracy. This section analyzes the real-world impact of ideology. The coupon analogy. Kennedy uses a simple metaphor, the pizza coupon, to explain tax incremental financing, TIF. This demystifies the complex economic concept and exposes AOC's "we can spend that $3 billion" argument as mathematically false. The Joe the Bodega owner narrative. By focusing on a specific victim, Joe, Kennedy shifts the sympathy from the community, abstract, to the individual, concrete. It proves that her war on Amazon had collateral damage, the small business owners she claims to protect. The Virginia comparison. Mentioning that Amazon went to Virginia and succeeded proves that the jobs were real. It wasn't a bluff. New York lost, Virginia won, and AOC is the reason why. Kennedy let the Amazon disaster hang in the air. He swapped the blue folder for a black one. You killed the jobs, Kennedy said. Now let's talk about the safety of the people who still live there. 2020. The Defund the Police movement. You were one of its loudest voices. You said we need to cut NYPD funding. You said police don't prevent crime. You said people steal bread because they are hungry. Kennedy pulled out a crime statistics report. In your district, shootings doubled. Carjackings went up 200%. Murders spiked. Your constituents, the working-class minorities you claim to serve, were the ones getting shot. They were the ones getting robbed. But while you were telling them they didn't need police, Kennedy pulled out a financial ledger. You were spending campaign funds on private security. $38,000 in a single month. tens of thousands more over the year. You hired former Blackwater contractors. You hired armed guards to follow you to the grocery store. Kennedy leaned in, his eyes narrowing. So, let me get this straight. For the single mother in the Bronx riding the subway at night, she gets social workers and violence interrupters. But for Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, she gets men with guns. Why is your life worth protecting with guns, but theirs isn't? AOC bristled. I receive death threats. I am a high-profile target. My security situation is different. Everyone's life is precious, Congresswoman, Kennedy roared. That 17-year-old kid who got shot in your district last week, his life mattered. The grandmother who got knocked out on the street, her life mattered. But you took away their protection while buying your own. That is the ultimate hypocrisy of the elite. Security for me, but not for thee. You live behind a wall of armed men, and from safety of that bubble, you lecture the rest of us about how we don't need guns, and we don't need cops. You aren't a revolutionary, Congresswoman. You are a feudal lord protecting your castle while the peasants fend for themselves. Analytical expansion, the hierarchy of safety. This section attacks the luxury beliefs of the elite. The two-tiered system. Kennedy exposes the reality that defund the police is a policy that only the rich can afford. The rich can hire private security. The poor rely on the police. By defunding the police, AOC hurt the poor while insulating herself. The death threat. Defense? Kennedy anticipates her defense and neutralizes it. He argues that threat is universal in high-crime areas. By elevating her own safety above her constituents, he paints her as narcissistic. The feudal metaphor. Comparing her to a feudal lord reinforces the idea that she views herself as a separate, superior class of citizen. Kennedy took a breath. He looked tired. He reached for the red folder. We've talked about jobs. We've talked about crime. We've talked about your boyfriend. But this last one, this one just breaks my heart. Let's talk about your grandmother. AOC stiffened. Leave my family out of this. You didn't leave her out of it, Kennedy snapped. You put her on Twitter. Kennedy pulled out a screenshot. June 2021. You posted photos of your grandmother's home in Puerto Rico. The roof was caving in. Buckets on the floor. You blamed Trump. You blamed the lack of aid. It went viral. Millions of views. You got the sympathy. You got the retweets. And then, Matt Walsh, a conservative commentator, started a GoFundMe. He raised $104,000 in 24 hours. Republicans, Democrats, regular folks, they wanted to fix Abuela's roof. Kennedy looked at her. And you rejected the money. You told your family to say no. You called it a political stunt. Congresswoman, the roof cost $5,000 to fix. You make $174,000 a year. You drive a Tesla. You wear designer clothes. Why didn't you just fix the roof yourself? The question hung in the air like a guillotine blade. Why did you let her live in squalor for years until you could take a photo of it to score political points? And when help arrived, why did you deny her a dry home just because the money came from people you hate? You chose the narrative over the family. You needed her to be a victim so you could be a savior. If the roof got fixed, the tweet wouldn't work. That isn't politics, Congresswoman. That is sociopathy. You treated your own flesh and blood like a prop in your social media feed. My daddy taught me that you take care of your own. You didn't. You used her. Analytical expansion. The moral nadir. This section is the character assassination. The refusal of solutions. Kennedy highlights that AOC preferred the problem, broken roof, to the solution, money. This proves she values grievance over progress. The financial capacity. By contrasting her salary, $174,000, with the repair cost, $5,000, Kennedy proves she could have helped, but chose not to. This paints her as stingy and unloving. The prop accusation. This is the ultimate insult. It suggests she dehumanizes everyone, even her family, viewing them only as content for her political brand. Kennedy closed the last folder. He stacked them up: the merch, the family, the Amazon deal, the security, the grandmother. A tower of evidence. He stood up. He walked to the front of the dais, holding a single sheet of paper. Congresswoman, we started this hearing talking about the Green New Deal. About $93 trillion. You told me I needed to learn modern economics. Well, I've looked at your economics today. Your economics is selling a $6 shirt for $58 and calling it justice. Your economics is paying your boyfriend with donor money. Your economics is chasing away $27 billion in revenue to save money you don't have. Your economics is letting your grandmother suffer to own the cons. Kennedy waved the paper. This isn't modern theory. This is fraud. You have built a career on the idea that math is a tool of oppression, that budgets are racist, that reality is whatever you tweet it is. But here is the truth, Ms. Ocasio-Cortez. You can't print dignity. You can't tweet a job into existence. And you can't build a future on resentment. You are selling a fairy tale to a generation that is desperate for hope. You promise them everything is free. You promise them the rich will pay for it all. But when the bill comes due, it's not the rich who pay. It's Joe, the bodega owner. It's the single mom in the Bronx. It's your own grandmother. You are the Pied Piper of economic destruction. Kennedy walked back to his seat and sat down heavily. I don't need to take your class, Congresswoman, because I know how this story ends. It ends with you in a Tesla and your voters on the bus. It ends with you at the Met Gala and your voters at the food bank. It ends with you rich and them poor. Kennedy looked at the chairman. Mr. Chairman, I have seen enough. The witness is dismissed. Analytical expansion. The total dismantling. This section serves as the philosophical conclusion. The unification of themes. Kennedy ties all the disparate scandals, merch, Amazon, grandma, into a single narrative. AOC exploits the poor for her own gain. Math as reality. Kennedy reclaims math not as a tool of oppression, but as the inescapable laws of physics. You cannot cheat reality forever. The final visual, the image of you in a Tesla, them on the bus, is the lasting impression. It cements the champagne socialist label forever. The hearing ended. AOC stood up, gathered her things, and checked her phone. She looked rattled. For the first time, she didn't stop for a selfie. She walked out the back door. The fallout. The clips hit the internet. The accordion file became a meme. Why didn't you fix the roof? Trended #1 on Twitter. Tesla socialist became the headline on the New York Post. The media tried to spin it. MSNBC ran segments on Republican misogyny. But the numbers were too stark. The Amazon math was undeniable. The sweatshirt markup was indefensible. The challenger 3 months later. A primary challenger announced in the Bronx. Maria Rodriguez. The woman who lost the Amazon job. She didn't have a degree from Boston University. She didn't have 10 million followers. She stood on a crate in front of the shuttered bodega. I don't want a revolution, Maria said. I want a job. I don't want a viral tweet. I want safe streets. And I don't want a representative who parties at the Met Gala while we stand in line for bread. The poll numbers shifted. The squad fractured. The spell was broken. The legacy Senator Kennedy went back to Louisiana. He sat on his porch, drinking iced tea. A reporter asked him, "Senator, do you think you ended her career?" Kennedy smiled. "No, son. I didn't end anything. I just turned on the lights. And like my daddy used to say, cockroaches hate the light." She thrived in the dark of the internet, where feelings matter more than facts. But in the harsh light of the Senate, under the weight of the receipts, Kennedy tapped his temple. The math always wins. If you believe in receipts over rhetoric, if you believe in math over myths, and if you believe America needs leaders, not influencers, share this story, because the bill is coming due, and it's time to pay up. Analytical expansion, the restoration of sanity. The conclusion synthesizes the narrative themes. Reality returns. The Maria archetype. The emergence of Maria Rodriguez, the victim of the Amazon deal, as the challenger represents the working class, reclaiming their voice from the elite progressives. The light metaphor. Kennedy frames his role not as an attacker, but as an illuminator. He didn't invent the scandals, he just revealed them. The final lesson. The story ends with a reaffirmation of conservative principles. Math, reality, and consequences are inescapable. No amount of social media clout can outrun the truth.